Broadcasting live from Jerusalem, this is Voice of Israel, Israel's premier English language broadcast network. Voice of Israel, bringing Israel closer.
Judy Lash-Balint here again on Jerusalem Diaries on Voice of Israel. Jerusalem inspires creative energy. That's for sure. Ever since King David composed his psalms here, the Holy City has been known as a place of poets, artists, musicians, and performers. Now, a group headed by a few of Jerusalem's well-known contemporary artists, who also happen to be committed to Jewish education, has put together an initiative to enhance the experience of visitors to Israel through the arts. HaOt, the Art of Jewish Learning, operates out of the basement of a Templar-style building on Emek Rephaim Street in Jerusalem's trendy German colony neighborhood. And joining me in the studio today is director Elisa Moss-Rabinowitz, who is the director of HaOt. Welcome, Elisa.
Thank you, Judy.
It's great to have you here. I'm fairly familiar with your programs because I've been to a number of them, and I find what you're doing very exciting. Tell me exactly how this all came to be. Where did the idea come from to start to do informal Jewish education through the arts?
So actually, the idea for HaOt came from the experience of the four partners who founded HaOt. Each of us in our own professional life had the background of using creativity and the arts in Jewish education. And we saw how powerful and meaningful the arts could be as a vehicle, as a tool for Jewish education. So the sort of mentor and inspiration that brought us all together is my father, David Moss. He's a well-known Judaic artist, and he has dedicated his career to combining and weaving together Jewish content with the arts in a really high-quality craftsmanship. And he had worked independently with my other two partners, Yair Medina, who owns a fine art print studio here in Talpiot, and Rabbi Matt Berkowitz, who is also a rabbi and artist, created his own Haggadah. And myself, I came from a background of event production and using the arts, theater and dance and music in Jewish education, in informal Jewish education as well. So we sort of all came together and realized everything we're doing individually could be so much more powerful and have such a greater impact if we came together and founded an organization that would really be dedicated to this work. And that's what we've been doing over the last few years.
And what are some of you have such a wealth of different projects. I mean, I've been to theater that you've put on. I've seen groups work with you doing very, very creative things. Tell me a little bit about the different varieties of projects that you've found successful and why. How do they lead people into Judaism? What's actually the effect of using art and Judaism together?
Okay, so I'm actually going to start with the second half of your question, and that is, how does it work and why is it so powerful? And I think as we're learning more and more today that people learn in different ways and have different abilities. And while we are the people of the book and text and letters and written Judaism is very crucial to our education, we know that not for everyone that's the easiest way to connect. And it, of course, also requires a certain amount of background knowledge, which not everyone has access to, both in terms of language and their education. And what's wonderful and beautiful about the arts is it's just an open door, which can allow anyone to engage with the Jewish text, with concept, with Jewish history, when presented in in a creative way, it allows people to just engage on a totally different level. So it's not to say that we don't need the written text, but it adds another level of experience. And in addition, in our workshops, we find that art is a universal language. It's also an equalizer. Everyone comes to it usually in our workshops with the same amount or lack of experience, and that's fine because everyone has creativity hidden inside them. In terms of the different types of projects we do, I would say right now we have four main arms of our organization that work in different fields. The first are what we call our educational workshops, which tend to be focused on the visual arts. And I'll give you some samples and examples of that in a little bit. But those are really geared towards groups. We work with a lot of visitors, like you said, group visitors to Israel, whether it's federations, missions, synagogue groups, youth groups, senior citizen groups, the whole range. And what they all have in common is that during the course of our hour-and-a-half long workshop, we will introduce some sort of artwork that exists that we share with the participants. And then through that, they engage with the text or Jewish value of which we're discussing. And then there's always a hands-on piece where they create something. They're themselves inspired by the artwork that they've seen. And it's always, as I said, does not assume any prior knowledge and really gives people an opportunity to process through the arts what their experience has been. So that's the first arm. In addition, as you mentioned, we have our performing arts section, which we both have created original theater and also just serve as a home and a host and a stage for many performing artists out there who are already doing wonderful work in music, in theater, in film, in dance, to sort of give them a stage and a place to share their work that focuses on Jewish content. And
it's a very creative, it's a very intimate space too. What I really liked about the space, because it's this fabulous old building and the theater is kind of in the basement, and it's really very evocative. You feel like you're together with the performer and you feel like you're part of this experience. So yeah, highly recommended. It's
very intimate and engaging. And that was something we were looking for when we searched for a space, and we were very happy to be able to collaborate with Martev Theater on Emek Refayim, as you mentioned. Two other things I'll mention are we do a few times a year large events that are open to the public, usually around the time of the Chagim. So we're almost at Pesach, and every year Kol HaOt hosts a special Haggadah artist fair. This year, it's going to be at the Inbal Hotel, where we can accommodate many more than our intimate setting on Emek Refayim. And the theme this year is the Four Sons. It's going to be focused on how the Four Sons, or in even more contemporary Haggadot, the Four Children, have been portrayed in history artistically in many different Haggadot. And of course, each artist chooses their interpretation of what the wicked son is and who the evil son is, and the evil, the smart, the tam, the innocent, and the sheino yodea lishol, those that who does not know how to ask. So we will have both an exhibit of both historic and contemporary Haggadot that will be facilitated and guided by our guides. So to engage both in Hebrew and English with the audience. And in addition, we will have many contemporary Haggadah artists there showing their works and selling their Haggadot.
And that will go on during the intermediate days of Passover?
Yes, it will be on Monday of Chol HaMoed on April 6th from 5 to 10 p.m.
At the Inbal Hotel in Jerusalem. And for more information on this, you can go to the Kol HaOt website, which is KOLHAOT.com. You'll find there are all kinds of information about all these projects. Now,
let me just mention the fourth arm that I wanted to share with you. And this is something that's new and very exciting for us. Most of our audience are just lay people. And we recently have begun working also in teacher education, which we feel is really the greatest way to have a large impact. Because if we could work together with teachers who really will understand and get this idea of the arts not only being like sort of an extra side thing in education, but actually a vehicle and an important part, an integral part of Jewish education. So we are this summer going to be opening our first training for day school teachers. It's going to be open to about 10 to 12 schools in North America, where we're going to bring teams of teachers from each school. So it'll be 1 or 2 Judaic studies teacher together with the arts teacher, who in some cases in those schools are not even Jewish and don't even have any Jewish connection. And we're going to bring them together and teach them and mentor them and show them how the arts can be incorporated and enhance the Jewish education piece. So that's something very exciting.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you exactly about that, because it strikes me. I was a teacher in many years ago in after school in a conservative school for many years, and yeah, it's really the teachers that need to learn these techniques of how to bring more innovation and bring the arts in. So for sure,
and even here in Israel, we've had the opportunity to do hishtalmuyot for teachers through the Tali Network and some other teacher trainings through a few. We're beginning to break into the Ministry of Education, so that's also very exciting.
So I'm talking today to Elisa Moss-Rabinowitz, the director of Kol HaOt. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. There's a lot more to talk about Judaism and the arts. This is Jerusalem Diaries. Follow us on Voice of Israel follow us on Twitter at VO Israel, and tell us what you think on Facebook at Voice of Israel. We'll be right back with more on Jerusalem Diaries at Voice of Israel. Stay tuned.
Voice of Israel, bringing Israel closer.
This is Judy Lash-Balint back on Jerusalem Diaries. Today we are talking about Judaism and the arts, some very creative things that are coming out of Jerusalem. We're talking with Elisa Moss-Rabinowitz, the director of Kol HaOt. The website is kolhaot, KOLHAOT.com if you want to learn even more. And before we went for our break, Elisa, we were talking about the various aspects of what you're doing. And what strikes me is, and what's very exciting, I think, is that there's nothing denominational in what you're doing. There's nothing political in what you're doing. It's a way for all Jews to connect with aspects of Judaism through creativity, basically. And that to me is something that's very appealing and should be appealing to people, I think, Jews all over the world, right?
Yeah, it's actually very true. And the groups we get range from totally non-affiliated, no background, to through rabbinical students from all three movements. We've worked with YU students, with conservative rabbis, and synagogues and congregations within the whole range, youth groups. And really, what's beautiful about it is because people are using the art to express themselves, what they really are bringing to the plate are their inner thoughts and feelings and interpretations of the Jewish texts and values. And so it doesn't matter what background they have and where they come from. It really just allows everyone to take one step further on their journey, their Jewish journey, wherever they may be.
Everybody has a way to express themselves. I know you've brought in some things for me to look at. And for our listeners, we are going to put up the video of this interview, actually, so you will be able to actually see this too. But show me what you've got here, Lisa.
Okay, I see you're very intrigued.
Yeah, it looks really exciting.
So I have here a few samples from two or three of our programs. One is the Midot program. It's called Mensch Maker, Make Me a Mensch. And it explores the concept of midot, of human characteristics, traits, Jewish traits that are inspired by God, but humans are supposed to emulate. And in this program, we actually give people basically just an opportunity to talk about some Jewish values that everyone actually cares about deeply, but doesn't usually have a chance to engage with on a day-to-day basis. And the way we do that is by a trigger artwork, like I mentioned before, where we'll share with them a piece of artwork. So this piece is by my father, David Moss. It's a set of 14 folders. I'm not going to show you all of them.
time out for 1 second. Tell me just a little bit more about your father and about his particular artworks, just in case some of our listeners don't know.
Okay, so my father, David Moss, he's most famous for two things. One is the revival of the illuminated ketubah art, which he started doing in the 70s. I mean, now many a couple will know what a ketubah is and will at least get some sort of, even if it's not personally commissioned, get some sort of print for a ketubah. And my
Which
father,
is a wedding contract, right?
Right. My father really sort of revived that idea and has done hundreds of ketubot for couples over the last 40 years or so. And then the second thing he is also most well known for is his Haggadah of Pesach. It's the Moss Haggadah, and it was created originally as just a single commission for a collector. And then after he worked on it for many years and it was finally created, they decided to produce it into a limited facsimile edition. And now there's also wider editions of it.
And it's stunning. Go onto Google. I'm sure you can see some images of it. It's really beautiful.
And what's really special about it is it's not just illustration, but actually through each piece, each page, you can learn a concept about the Haggadah. And that was sort of the inspiration for what we do at HaOt. We call it teachable art, where art is not just a personal exploration of the artist's inner vision, but rather has a goal to create a conversation with the viewer in terms of what they can learn from it. So back to our midot.
Back to midot, right?
So we start with pairing the participants up into small chavrutot, whether they're pairs or groups of three, to engage together. And I'm not going to run you through all of the stages, but they each get a different midah. So it could be tzedakah, it could be a charity. Ahava, love, rachamim, compassion, tikkun, repair, etc. Many different Jewish midot and concepts. And each one has both a poem, so it's written, and a collage artwork that goes together with it. And the artwork, I brought a few examples to share with you, is all collage. It's very simple. This is ahava, it's love. Okay, so they'll get some trigger questions where they have to sort of say to each other to try to interpret it, right? So Judy, how would you see in here love?
Well, it's definitely the two intertwining symbols, I guess, the two intertwining pieces,
the connection between two pieces, right? So you have a little bit of each one in the other. One is round, one has sharp edges, but then there's a bit of the round inside the other and a bit of the sharp edges. So it's a lot about what love is of the give and take, and having one of, and everyone interprets it in their own way. It's sort of, I always like to compare it to a certain degree to like a Rorschach, where you see in it what's actually reflected within you. So I'll give you some other examples. This is tzedakah.
Oh, that's evocative. Yeah.
Okay. So again, you can discuss here. It's all made out of paper. And we also point out to the participants to think about the colors, the shapes, the textures, right? So here you have the money, the dollar, in God we trust, coming either out or being inserted in, and the flowers growing. So is that by giving tzedakah you are creating life and beauty? Is it that the beauty is creating the money? It could go in different directions. I'll show you one more. This is rachamim. Okay, it's compassion. And it's three-dimensional in the original. Okay,
textured,
it's very textured. It uses a lot of soft, fluffy feeling. What does that mean to have compassion for somewhere else? No hard edges. No. The colors are warm and welcoming and calming. So these are just some examples where we'll show the participants, they'll engage through our prompting questions, with the artwork, with the poetry, which I haven't shared with you as well. And then they'll move on to creating their own collages and poems based on a certain Jewish value or trait that they've chosen. And again, depending on the group, if the group itself is focusing on a certain theme, for example, we recently did it for a large conference at the JCC, International JCC conference in Budapest, where there were heads of JCCs from all over the world and interacting together with what does peoplehood mean to them? What is Jewish peoplehood?
I was going to ask you about that because I know many of the groups that come and take part in your activities are from abroad. Along with the element of Judaism and art, is there a notion here of connecting diaspora with Israel? I mean, is that part of the goal?
Yes, that definitely. And one of our most popular programs is called Mapping the Journey. And that program focuses on giving participants who have come on a short trip to Israel, whether it's a week or 10 days like they tend to be. And usually those trips are jam-packed full of activities and sites and tour guides and meeting local people and everything. And we've had some of our participants say that that kind of a trip, especially a first trip, is like trying to drink water out of a fire hose. Like you can't take it all in. And so our Mapping the Journey program is actually meant to give the participants an opportunity to reflect, to process what they have gone through. And the way we do that is through the art of mapping, which is, also an ancient art. We know many people are familiar with the famous map of Jerusalem being the center of the world. So for years, people have come to Jerusalem and created maps of their journeys. And we take it one step further and enable participants to create not just a map of their physical or geographical journey, but really a map of the journey of their soul. So again, we engage with them, we show them artwork. There's a work of a bike map that we share. There's another work which is this journey based on the story of Akedat Yitzchak, the
binding of Isaac.
The binding of Isaac, and it's really the journey of Abraham and Isaac as they go from the minute Abraham gets the call to Mount Moriah. So I don't have time to go into it now, but as you could see, it's very symbolic images. Probably doesn't mean anything to you now, but if you would come to one of our programs, we would teach you how to use this kind of symbolic imagery and language to tell the journey and the narrative of your story.
So it's very easy to see how anybody, who's even slightly interested in anything Jewish, could be pulled in by these very creative approaches rather than, sitting in a room listening to a lecture or listening to a teacher go on, about text or definitely this is the new wave of education, right? I mean, informal Jewish education is...
And there's something about that sort of spark of excitement that people get when they see something really creative that just pulls you in.
Right.
And being able to share that with people and then allow them to create that spark for others is really quite a privilege.
Where's your funding from? Very quick question.
So it's mostly from private donors, mostly in the United States, but also from federations and grants. And we also have a few arms for income that we create through our programming as well.
So we've been talking to Elisa Moss-Rabinowitz, the director of Kol HaOt, about this very, very broad-based program that, again, just shows you what kind of creativity is coming out of Jerusalem and out of Israel. Thanks so much for joining me in the studio.
Thank you.
This is Judy Lash-Balint on Voice of Israel. For more great shows, be sure to visit voiceofisrael.com. Be sure to also follow us on Twitter. Let us know what you think. VO Israel, join the conversation on Facebook at Voice of Israel. Signing out from Jerusalem Diaries on another great Jerusalem day.
If you enjoyed that video, click on the link below to go to the website and hear more Voices of Israel.